The drought of 1879 had already killed half his cattle when Thaddeus Garrett shot a man dead in his own front yard. The bounty hunter had been creeping toward the barn. Winchester raised when Thad's first shot caught him square between the shoulder blades. The man stumbled forward, turned with surprising speed, and managed to fire once before Thad's second bullet found his throat. Thad approached cautiously, his wooden leg scraping against the hard-packed earth, Colt still trained on the dying man. Blood bubbled from the bounty hunter's lips as his eyes locked onto Thad's. "Morrison will burn this place to the ground when he finds out," he wheezed, fingers clawing at the dust. "And the senator? He'll bury you alive." "What's Morrison want on my land?" Thad demanded, pressing the barrel against the man's chest. The bounty hunter's laugh became a wet gurgle. "Not what? Who?" His eyes rolled toward the barn before the light in them faded completely. Thad holstered his weapon and knelt awkwardly, searching the dead man's pockets. He found what he expected: a bounty notice with crude sketches of two Apache women extraordinarily tall with distinctive features. One had a scar across her face. The reward, $500 each, dead or alive. Authorization signed by Captain James Morrison, U.S. Cavalry. He also found something unexpected: a folded map of Apache territory with military markings and a handwritten note, "Confirmation required before relocation plan proceeds. H." In the distance, a lone coyote howled. Thad looked toward his barn, then back at the cooling body. The morning stretched wide and empty around him, 20 miles of drought-stricken wilderness in every direction. No witnesses but God and the buzzards already circling overhead. "Well, shit," he muttered, pushing himself upright. Thaddeus Garrett had not always been a solitary rancher with a wooden leg and a talent for killing. At 45, the lines etched deep in his weathered face told of a life lived hard under merciless suns. His beard, once black as a moonless night, now carried streaks of silver, particularly around the perpetual frown that had settled onto his mouth after Gettysburg. He'd been Captain Thaddeus Garrett, then Company B, 20th Maine Infantry. The wooden leg came courtesy of a Confederate artillery shell on the battle's third day. The same battle that earned him a Medal of Honor he kept buried in a trunk alongside his wife's wedding dress and his dead son's baby shoes. After burying the bounty hunter in a shallow grave behind the corral, Thad limped to the barn, Springfield rifle in hand. He pushed open the door, letting sunlight spill across the hay-strewn floor. "Whoever's in here, I ain't in the mood for games," he called. "Come out and we'll talk civilized." For a moment, nothing moved. Then from the shadowed corner came a voice low and steady, with the distinct accent of educated Apache. "We mean no harm to you or your home." Two figures emerged from behind his hay bales. Thad had encountered Apache before, fought them, traded with them, even shared meals with a few. But these women were unlike any he'd seen. The taller one stood at least 6'4", with a regal bearing that seemed to fill the barn despite her ragged buckskin dress. Her companion, scarred across the face and missing her right eye, was still an imposing 6 feet. Both moved with the fluid grace of natural predators' muscles shifting beneath bronze skin with coiled, lethal potential. "You're the ones Morrison's hunting," Thad said, keeping his rifle steady. The tall one nodded. "I am Nalnish. This is Dispa." She gestured to her scarred companion. "We ask for one night's shelter. By tomorrow, we will be gone." Thad's finger rested lightly on the trigger. "Just killed a man looking for you. Won't be the last." "We can pay," Dispa said, her voice raspier than her companion's, damaged like her face. She reached slowly into a pouch and produced 3 gold coins. "Keep your money," Thad said. "What I want is the truth. What's a U.S. Army captain want with two Apache women bad enough to send killers onto private land? The women exchanged glances. "We killed Captain Morrison's son," Nalnish said simply. Thad's grip tightened on his rifle. "That seems like something you might have mentioned earlier." "We killed him," Dispa clarified, her single eye unflinching, "because he tried to rape my sister after she refused to stay silent about Morrison and Senator Holloway stealing government funds meant for our people at San Carlos." Thad's jaw tightened. He'd heard rumors about conditions at the reservation, disease, starvation, children dying while government agents grew fat. He'd dismissed it as just another sad chapter in the bloody story of westward expansion. Now that story had walked into his barn, tall as legends and desperate as the land itself. Morrison's son said Apache women were government property. Nalnish continued, her dark eyes holding Thad's. That resistance meant death. Something cold and familiar settled in Thad's chest, the same feeling he'd had at Antietam, at Fredericksburg, at every place where he'd witnessed power wielded without mercy. Before he could respond, Disba moved to the barn door and peered out. "Dust," she said sharply. "Riders coming. Many." Thad joined her, looking toward the horizon where a tan cloud rose like smoke. Even at this distance, he could make out the glint of morning sun on military brass. "Morrison," Nalnish confirmed, "with soldiers." Thad calculated quickly. A dozen riders, maybe more. 20 minutes before they reached the ranch, he had a decision to make. "Why'd you come to my land?" he asked, turning back to them. "We needed water," Nalnish answered. "But also, we know who you are, Captain Garrett, Medal of Honor, the man who held the line at Little Round Top when all seemed lost." Thad's eyes narrowed. That was another life. A life where honor mattered. Dispa said, her single eye seeming to look straight through him. "We gambled that it still does." The dust cloud grew larger on the horizon. Thad thought of his wife, dead from fever 5 years past. Of his son, killed in an Apache raid in '75. He should hate these women and everything they represented. Instead, he remembered the bounty hunter's map, the cold calculation of relocation plans, the ghosts of the battlefield that still whispered to him on sleepless nights about the difference between following orders and doing what's right. "I've got a cellar," he said finally. "Dug it when I first settled here during the worst of the raids. Entrance is hidden under the kitchen floor." Relief flickered across Nalnish's proud face. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Thad warned. "You're still in my home when Morrison arrives. If I decide your story doesn't add up, I'll hand you over myself." They followed him to the small ranch house. Inside was sparse but meticulously clean, the home of a man who'd learned military discipline and never unlearned it. He moved the kitchen table, pulled up a trap door, and revealed a narrow staircase descending into darkness. "It's not comfortable," he said, "but it's cool, and there's water stored. Stay quiet, no matter what you hear." As the women descended, Dispa paused. From within her dress, she pulled a small, leather-bound book and handed it to Thad. "Morrison and Holloway's accounting," she explained. "The numbers that do not match the supplies delivered. The proof we were willing to die for." Thad took the book, weighing it in his hand. "Get below, and pray your conscience is cleaner than mine." He replaced the trapdoor, slid the table back, and had just poured himself a whiskey when the first riders entered his yard. Through the window he watched as a large man with a thick mustache and cold eyes dismounted. Captain James Morrison had arrived, 12 cavalrymen at his back, all armed, and looking like they hoped for trouble. Thad took a long swallow of whiskey, checked his colt, and stepped onto his porch to face whatever reckoning had come. "Morrison," he called out deliberately, leaving off the rank. What brings the U.S. cavalry unannounced onto private property? Morrison's eyes narrowed as he took in Thad's wooden leg, the gun on his hip, the hard set of his jaw. Captain Garrett, he replied, emphasizing the title Thad no longer claimed. Or is it just Mr., now that you've chosen to become a hermit? It's get to the point or get off my land, Thad replied evenly. Morrison's smile never reached his eyes. We're tracking two dangerous fugitives, Apache women who murdered my son. My scouts tracked them to this area. He gestured to the barn and outbuildings. I'll need to search your property. Got a warrant? Thad asked. Don't need one. Military jurisdiction when pursuing hostiles. Not on private land owned by a U.S. citizen, it ain't, Thad countered. My war record still affords me some courtesy, I'd expect. A muscle twitched in Morrison's jaw. Your war record won't mean much if you're harboring murderers, Garrett. The standoff stretched between them, 12 rifles against one old soldier with a wooden leg and a stubborn streak. Then a voice called from behind the house. The tracks lead south. Captain. 2 horses moving fast. A lean Apache man in cavalry scout's uniform emerged from behind Thad's house. He wore the blue uniform uneasily, like a second skin that didn't quite fit. Running Wolf, Morrison acknowledged with visible distaste. You're certain? The scout nodded once. Fresh tracks, not more than 2 hours old. Thad maintained his neutral expression, but his mind raced. Who was this scout? And what game was he playing? The women had arrived on foot, not horseback. Morrison turned back to Thad, studying him. Seems your property is clear, Garrett, for now. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. But I'll be stationing men on the road. Any travelers passing through will be thoroughly questioned. Your jurisdiction ends at my property line, Thad reminded him. Morrison's smile was cold as winter. I've sent a rider to Fort Bowie for official search orders. When they arrive tomorrow, I'll be back to search every inch of this place. If I find you've been lying... He let the threat hang unfinished. Thad watched them ride out the scout named Running Wolf, glancing back once with an unreadable expression. Only when they disappeared over the rise did Thad release the breath he'd been holding. Something wasn't right. The scout had deliberately misled Morrison. But why? He returned inside and moved the table again. As the trap door opened, Nalnish and Dispa emerged blinking in the sudden light. Morrison's gone for now, Thad informed them. But he's coming back tomorrow with a search warrant. Says he's posting men on the road. Did Running Wolf find us? Nalnish asked urgently. Thad's eyes narrowed. You know that scout. He is Geronimo's nephew, Dispa explained. He pretends to work for the army but secretly helps our people. Well, he just sent Morrison south. Claimed you two left on horseback. Relief washed over both women's faces. He buys us time, Nalnish said. Time for what? Thad demanded. Morrison will be back by noon tomorrow with legal authority to tear this place apart. By then we must be gone, Dispa said. To Tucson. A newspaper writer there has agreed to publish evidence of Morrison and Holloway's crimes. Thad pulled out the accounting book Dispa had given him and opened it. Inside were careful columns of numbers, shipments, recorded supplies, supposedly delivered to San Carlos. Alongside were actual counts. Half the promised beef rancid flour medicine that never arrived. Thousands of dollars missing with initials JM and EH. Senator Edward Holloway, Nalnish clarified, watching Thad's expression. Chairman of the Western Territories Committee, Morrison's protector in Washington. Holloway's pushing for all Apache to be relocated further south, Thad said, remembering the newspaper articles. Onto even worse land. Nalnish nodded grimly. Land without water or game. Not relocation, Extermination. While the land we leave behind will be sold to railroad interests, companies where Holloway owns significant shares. Thad closed the book. Politics, corruption. The same darkness he'd tried to leave behind when he bought this remote patch of Arizona dirt. He wanted no part of it. But looking at the proud, desperate faces before him, he knew it wasn't that simple. A choice between what's easy and what's right wasn't really a choice at all. Morrison's men will be watching the roads, he said finally. But I know another way to Tucson, an old Apache trail through the mountains. You would help us? Dispa asked, surprise evident in her voice. I fought a war to free men from bondage, Thad replied quietly, not to chain them to reservations while thieves grow fat on their suffering. Hope flickered across Nalnish's face, the first genuine emotion he'd seen break through her stoic facade. Thank you. Outside, the shadows lengthened as afternoon slid toward evening. 20 miles away, Morrison's men were setting up roadblocks. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning one way or another. Get some rest, Thad told the women. We leave at first light. It's rough country between here and Tucson. As they settled in the main room, Thad stepped outside to check his horses and make preparations. The dying sun painted the drought-stricken landscape in bloody hues, the promise of another day without rain hanging in the cloudless sky. From a hidden pocket in his jacket, he removed a tarnished medal, the Medal of Honor. He never looked at the weight of duty he couldn't escape. Perhaps some debts could never be fully paid, but he could still choose what kind of man he wanted to be in whatever time remained to him. The decision made, he tucked the medal away and began gathering supplies for the journey ahead. Behind him, the land stretched empty and unforgiving, holding its secrets close like a poker player with a winning hand. Night fell across Arizona territory like a burial shroud, bringing with it the cool mercy of darkness after the punishing heat of day. Thad checked his weapons one last time, wondering if, come morning, he would still be a rancher with a wooden leg or become something else entirely. A fugitive, a revolutionary, or simply a dead man who'd chosen the wrong side. Inside the house, the two Apache sisters whispered together in their ancient language, plotting their escape, carrying evidence that could bring down powerful men. Outside, somewhere in the darkness, Morrison's men waited ready to kill for secrets that must never see the light of day. Dawn would reveal which side fate favored in this deadly game of truth and consequences played out on the merciless stage of the American frontier. Dawn crept across the horizon like a thief, stealing the night's shadows inch by inch. Thad was already awake, had been for hours watching from his porch as the land transformed from silver black to dusty gold. He'd spent most of the night studying Morrison's accounting book, anger growing with each fraudulent entry. Thousands of lives reduced to numbers that didn't add up. The women emerged from the house silently, Nalnish ducking through the doorway that was too small for her impressive height. Both had tied back their long hair and changed from dresses into more practical buckskins that Thad had found in an old trunk. His late wife had collected native crafts, finding beauty in cultures others feared. The horses are saddled, Thad said, nodding toward the barn. Food and water for 3 days. Should be enough to reach Tucson if we push hard. You are coming with us? Nalnish asked, surprise evident in her voice. Someone's got to make sure you reach that newspaper man, Thad replied gruffly. And I know the trails. Besides, he added, patting the Springfield rifle resting across his knees, might be you'll need another gun before this is done. A flicker of something respect, perhaps, crossed Dispa's scarred face. Her single eye assessed him with new consideration. What of your home? She asked. Morrison will destroy it when he finds you gone. Thad looked back at the small ranch house he'd built with his own hands after the war, the place where his wife had died, where he'd buried his sorrows in hard work and harder whiskey. "Just wood and nails," he said finally. "Can always build another." He didn't add what all three of them knew, that if they failed, none of them would need shelter ever again. As they prepared to leave, a movement at the edge of Thad's property caught his eye. A lone figure on horseback emerged from the tree line, approaching cautiously. Running Wolf. Nalnish identified him, tension evident in her stance. The Apache scout dismounted smoothly and approached his cavalry uniform, incongruous against his native features. Up close, Thad could see the intelligence in his eyes, the careful calculation in every movement. "Morrison grows impatient," Running Wolf said without preamble. "He's received word that his search warrant arrives by noon. He plans to burn the ranch if you resist." "How'd you slip away?" Thad asked suspiciously. "Volunteered to scout the back trails." A ghost of a smile touched Running Wolf's lips. "They trust me to find Apache tracks because I am Apache. They forget this also means I know how to hide my own." "Can we trust him?" Thad asked Nalnish directly. Before she could answer, Running Wolf spoke. "Morrison killed my brother at San Carlos, said he was resisting relocation. He was 9 winters old." The flat delivery made the words even more chilling. "My loyalty is to my people, not the blue coat I wear to survive." Thad recognized the look in the younger man's eyes, the cold fire of vengeance banked but never extinguished. He'd seen it in the mirror often enough. "Morrison sent 4 men to watch the South Road, and 3 to the north," Running Wolf continued. "But he knows nothing of the old path through Thunder Canyon." "It's where we're headed," Thad confirmed. Running Wolf nodded. "I will return to Morrison. Tell him I found signs you fled west toward California. It will buy you 1 day, perhaps 2. "Why risk yourself?" Thad asked. The scout's eyes hardened. "The book Dispa carries documents more than stolen money. It proves Morrison ordered the slaughter of 37 women and children last winter, then blamed it on a band of renegade Apache. My family was among them." A heavy silence fell. Finally, Thad extended his hand, which the younger man clasped firmly. "Godspeed," Running Wolf said, then turned to Nalnish and spoke rapidly in Apache. She nodded once solemnly before he mounted and rode away. "What did he say?" Thad asked as they watched the scout disappear. "That the spirits of our ancestors ride with us," Nalnish translated. Then more quietly, "and that if we fail, he will ensure Morrison dies screaming." Thad checked his pocket watch. "It's time. We need to be in the canyon before full light." They mounted Thad, awkwardly adjusting his wooden leg in the stirrup, and rode out, keeping to the shadows of the tree line. Behind them, the small ranch stood silent, a life abandoned for a cause not yet won. Thunder Canyon earned its name honestly. The narrow passage between towering red cliffs amplified every sound. Hoofbeats became thunder whispers transformed into ghostly echoes. They rode single file, Thad leading Dispa, taking rear guard with a shotgun across her saddle. "Army never patrols here," Thad explained as they navigated the twisting path. "Too easy for ambush. Apache used it for generations. Our people called it the Ghost Road," Nalnish said from behind him. "It was said that only those with pure hearts could pass through safely. All others would be driven mad by the voices in the stones." Thad grunted. "Guess we'll find out what kind of hearts we have." They rode in silence for a time, the only sounds their horses labored breathing and the occasional skitter of loose rocks. The canyon wound deeper into the mountains, sometimes narrowing until their knees nearly brushed the walls. By midday, they'd covered 15 miles of difficult terrain. Thad called a brief halt in a small clearing where a spring bubbled from the rock face. As the horses drank, he studied his companions. Dispa remained vigilant, her single eye constantly scanning their surroundings. The scar that claimed her other eye continued down her cheek, disappearing beneath her collar. The mark of some terrible violence survived. Nalnish moved with an almost regal bearing despite their flight. Something about her reminded Thad of the few educated freedmen he'd known during Reconstruction, people who carried knowledge like armor against a world determined to diminish them. "How'd you learn to read their books?" he asked her as they shared dried beef and hard biscuits. "The accounting ledgers. The missionaries at San Carlos," she replied. "They believed teaching us the white man's words would make us forget our own." A wry smile touched her lips. "Instead, it gave us weapons they never anticipated." "And your sister?" Thad nodded toward Dispa. "She has the look of a warrior, not a scholar." "We are not blood sisters," Nalnish corrected. "Dispa was Navajo taken as a slave by Comanche as a child. My father's raiding party found her during a skirmish, brought her home. We grew up together, became sisters, in all ways that matter." The eye, white settlers. Dispa answered for herself, voice matter-of-fact. "They attacked us when Nalnish was 14. I was 16. They wanted the young one. I disagreed with their intentions." She touched her scarred face briefly. "They had knives. I had determination." Thad nodded, understanding. Some stories needed no elaboration. "And you, Captain Garrett?" Nalnish asked. "Your leg was lost in the Great War." "Gettysburg," he confirmed. "Confederate artillery shell turned everything below my knee to splinters." He took a swig from his canteen. "Army surgeon took one look and started sawing. Told me I was lucky." "Were you?" Dispa asked. Thad considered this. "Most days, no. Some days, perhaps. Depends whether you think it's luck to survive when so many better men didn't." A distant rumble interrupted them, not thunder, but hoofbeats, many horses moving fast. "Morrison!" Dispa hissed, already on her feet, shotgun ready. "Impossible," Thad said. "Even if he found the canyon entrance, Running Wolf said we had at least a day's head start." Nalnish climbed quickly to a rocky outcropping, shielding her eyes against the midday sun as she looked back the way they'd come. Her tall frame tensed. "6 riders," she reported. "Not Morrison. Different uniforms. They ride as if pursued." Thad joined her, squinting into the distance. His blood ran cold as he made out the gray uniforms. "Texas Rangers," he said grimly. "Must be the ones who've been raiding across the border. Army's been hunting them for months." "Why are they here?" Nalnish asked. "Canyon's the perfect escape route into Mexico. Cuts days off the journey, avoids all the regular patrols." Thad's mind raced. "If they find us, they won't leave witnesses." "And behind them?" Dispa asked. "Who pursues?" Thad looked again. A larger dust cloud followed the Rangers, still distant but gaining. "Morrison," he concluded, "must have spotted the Rangers and given chase rather than waiting for his warrant. Likely doesn't even know we're here." "2 enemies converging," Nalnish said quietly. "With us caught between." Thad calculated quickly. The Rangers would reach them in 15 minutes, Morrison's cavalry perhaps 30 minutes later. The canyon continued south for another 10 miles before opening into a network of smaller ravines. No way to outrun mounted men, especially with his wooden leg slowing them down. "We need to hide," he decided. "Let both groups pass, then continue after dark." "No," Dispa countered, pointing upward. "We climb." Thad followed her gaze to a narrow path cut into the canyon wall almost invisible, unless you knew to look for it. It zigzagged upward, disappearing into a dark crevice high above. Ancient dwelling, Nalnish explained. Our people used such places for centuries. The horses cannot follow, but neither can we be tracked. Thad eyed the path dubiously. With this leg, I will help you, Dispa said firmly, already gathering essential supplies from their saddlebags. Nalnish, take the evidence. I'll bring the weapons. No time for argument. Thad secured the horses in a small grotto where they'd have shade and water, hoping they'd be overlooked in the coming confrontation. Then, with Dispa's strong hand guiding him, he began the arduous climb. Each step was agony on his good leg, the wooden one worse than useless on the narrow trail. Sweat poured down his face as they climbed higher, the drop below becoming more deadly with each yard gained. Dispa moved with astonishing grace, despite carrying their rifles, her scarred face revealing no strain as she practically dragged Thad upward. They reached the crevice just as the first rangers thundered into the clearing below. From their hidden vantage, they watched as the 6 men dismounted their horses, lathered and heaving. The rangers were hard men with trail-worn faces and eyes that had seen too much death to fear it anymore. McAllister says to hold this position, their leader ordered a tall man with a silver-streaked beard. Ambush the cavalry when they follow. We need time to get the gold across the border. Thad's eyes widened. He hadn't noticed before, but each ranger led a pack horse laden with bulging saddlebags. That's the army payroll they stole from Fort Stockton, he whispered to Nalnish. 30,000 in gold. Below, the rangers took up positions among the rocks, rifles ready. They didn't bother searching further up the canyon walls, confident in their ambush position. 10 tense minutes passed before Morrison's cavalry unit appeared, 16 men riding hard, Morrison himself in the lead. The rangers held their fire, waiting for the soldiers to enter the narrowest part of the canyon. We have to warn them, Nalnish whispered, surprising Thad. Why, Morrison wants you dead. Because 16 more deaths won't bring justice to those already lost, she replied. And because Morrison must face a proper trial for his crimes, not die anonymously in an outlaw's ambush. Before Thad could respond, Dispa had already taken aim with his Springfield. Her single eye narrowed as she tracked the lead ranger, then squeezed the trigger. The shot echoed like cannon fire in the confined space. The ranger crumpled, and chaos erupted below. Morrison's men reined up sharply, taking cover as the remaining rangers opened fire. Their ambush sprung too soon. Dispa fired again, dropping a second ranger. The cavalry returned fire bullets, ricocheting off stone walls. Caught in a crossfire from above and ahead, the rangers' position quickly became untenable. Fall back, their leader shouted. Get to the horses! As the rangers retreated toward their mounts, Morrison spotted movement on the canyon wall. His eyes locked with Thad's for one startled moment before he barked orders to his men. Up there, it's Garrett with the Apache women, $500 to the man who brings me their heads. Time to go, Thad muttered, pulling himself deeper into the crevice. It opened into a larger chamber, an ancient dwelling carved into the living rock. Pictographs covered the walls, their meanings lost to time. There's another way out, Nalnish said, pointing to a dark passage at the rear. It emerges 3 miles south near Rattlesnake Creek. Gunfire continued outside as they hurried through the passage, hunched over in the low tunnel. Thad's wooden leg struck stone, with every step the sound echoing ominously. They're coming after us, he said, hearing voices entering the front chamber. Morrison won't let the rangers distract him from bigger prey. Then we must move faster, Dispa replied, taking more of his weight as they pushed forward. The tunnel seemed endless, winding through the mountain's heart like an ancient serpent. Occasionally, They passed side passages or other chambers, evidence of a vast network created by people long vanished. The air grew stale, the darkness absolute, except for the small lantern Nalnish had salvaged from their supplies. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they saw light ahead. The tunnel opened onto a narrow ledge overlooking a different canyon, smaller, greener, with a ribbon of water glinting below. Rattlesnake Creek, Nalnish confirmed. From here, it's 18 miles to Tucson. Thad peered over the edge. The drop was significant, but manageable with care. "How do we get down?" "Carefully," Dispa replied, already securing a rope to a sturdy rock outcropping. As she prepared for their descent, Thad heard voices echoing from the tunnel behind them. Morrison's men were getting closer. "Go," he told the women, pressing the accounting book into Nalnish's hands. "I'll hold them off. Buy you time to reach Tucson." "No," Nalnish said firmly. "We go together or not at all." "Be sensible," Thad argued. "I'm slowing you down. With this leg, I'll never make it down that rope in time. The evidence is what matters. It has to reach that newspaper." "He's right," Dispa said quietly to Nalnish. "The book must reach Tucson." Conflict played across Nalnish's proud features. Finally, she nodded, taking the book and securing it inside her clothing. 2 days to Tucson on foot, Thad instructed. "Ask for Michael Reynolds at the Arizona Star. Don't trust anyone else." The voices grew louder. "Go," Thad urged, drawing his Colt, "before it's too late." Dispa descended first, moving down the rope with practiced ease despite her burden of weapons. Nalnish hesitated, then leaned forward and kissed Thad's weathered cheek. "Your heart was pure enough for the ghost road after all." "Thaddeus Garrett," she said softly. Then she too was gone, sliding down the rope toward the creek below. Thad took position beside the tunnel entrance, pistol ready. He'd fought in enough battles to know when one was unwinnable. But sometimes victory wasn't the point. Sometimes you just needed to buy time for something more important than yourself. The first soldier emerged cautiously from the tunnel. Thad's shot caught him in the shoulder, sending him scrambling back with a yell of pain. More gunfire followed, bullets chipping the ancient stone around Thad's position. "Garrett!" Morrison's voice boomed from within the tunnel. "There's nowhere to run. Surrender the Apache women, and I might let you live." "Come and get them," Thad called back, firing another round into the tunnel. For 10 minutes he held the tunnel entrance, forcing Morrison's men to keep their distance. Below, he caught glimpses of Nalnish and Dispa making their way along the creek already a quarter-mile south. Then a searing pain tore through his side. One of Morrison's men had found an angle, sent a bullet between the rocks that found Thad's flesh. He pressed a hand to the wound, feeling warm blood soak his shirt. "You're hit, Garrett," Morrison called, having heard Thad's involuntary grunt of pain. "It's over. Tell us where they went." Thad checked his ammunition. 3 bullets left. Not enough. Morrison must have reached the same conclusion. "Rush him," he ordered. 3 soldiers burst from the tunnel at once. Thad dropped one, but the others were on him before he could fire again. A rifle butt struck his temple, sending him sprawling. Through blurred vision, he saw Morrison emerge, a triumphant smile beneath his thick mustache. "Captain Thaddeus Garrett," Morrison said, looking down at him. "Medal of Honor winner, hero of Little Round Top, and now traitor to your race and country." Thad spat blood. "Only traitor here is you, Morrison, stealing from those in your care, murdering children." Morrison's boot connected with Thad's wounded side, bringing a fresh wave of agony. "Search the area," Morrison ordered his men. "Find those women." One of the soldiers peered over the ledge. "Sir, tracks leading south along the creek." Morrison smiled coldly. "Seems your Apache whores have abandoned you, Garrett. Not surprising. Savages have no loyalty." Through pain-fogged eyes, Thad saw Disba's rope still dangling over the edge. In minutes, Morrison's men would be in pursuit, likely catching the women before they'd covered 5 miles. "They're headed for Mexico," Thad gasped, a desperate plan forming. "Taking the evidence to Geronimo, planning an uprising." Morrison's eyes narrowed. "Evidence? What evidence?" "Your ledger," Thad coughed, playing on the captain's fears. "Records of every theft, every murder. Your name, Holloway's name, everything." Uncertainty flickered across Morrison's face. "You're lying. Why do you think they killed your son?" "He found the book, was going to expose you both." A muscle twitched in Morrison's jaw. Thad could almost see the calculations behind his eyes, the political fallout if such evidence reached Washington versus the satisfaction of personal revenge. "Mexico," Morrison repeated. "How the border's 100 miles south. Underground railroad." Thad improvised, referring to the secret network that once helped escaped slaves. "Apache have their own version. Way stations, safe houses, been operating for years." It was a desperate bluff, but Thad was betting on Morrison's paranoia and racial fears. The captain's face darkened as he considered the implications. "Phillips," Morrison barked to his sergeant. "Take 10 men ride for Tucker's Crossing. Cut them off before they reach the border. Davis Matthews, stay with me. We're taking Garrett back to Fort Bowie for interrogation." Thad suppressed a smile despite his pain. Tucker's Crossing was 40 miles southwest, the opposite direction from Tucson. As the soldiers divided their forces, Morrison knelt beside Thad, voice low and menacing. "If you're lying to me, Garrett, I'll personally see that they peel the skin from your back one strip at a time." "Something to look forward to," Thad replied through gritted teeth. 2 soldiers hauled him roughly to his feet. His wooden leg had cracked in the struggle, making standing nearly impossible. They half-dragged him back through the tunnel toward the canyon where their horses waited. The journey was agony, every step sending fresh pain through Thad's wounded side. By the time they emerged into daylight again, his shirt was soaked with blood, his face gray with shock. The canyon below was littered with bodies, both Rangers and cavalry soldiers, fallen in the firefight. Only 3 Rangers had escaped, leaving behind 2 of their precious saddlebags in their haste. 15,000 in Army gold. Morrison's sergeant reported having opened the abandoned bags. "Do we pursue the others, sir?" Morrison glanced at Thad's deteriorating condition. "No, the Apache women are the priority now. We'll send another detail after the Rangers." He patted the recovered saddlebags. "Senator Holloway will be pleased we recovered at least this much." They bound Thad to his own horse, his hands tied to the saddle horn. As they prepared to ride, Morrison approached one final time. "I've been wondering, Garrett," he said casually, "why a man with your distinguished record would throw everything away for 2 Apache fugitives." Thad raised his head with effort. "Maybe I've seen too many men like you, Morrison. Men who wrap greed and cruelty in the flag, calling it patriotism." "Poetic," Morrison sneered. "We'll see if you remain so principled after a few days in Fort Bowie's interrogation cell." They rode out of the canyon as the sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the blood-soaked ground. Thad fought to stay conscious, knowing that every mile they traveled north toward Fort Bowie was another mile of safety for Nalnish and Dispa heading east to Tucson. Whether the women would make it, whether the evidence would reach the right hands, whether any justice would come from his sacrifice, these questions swirled in Thad's fading thoughts. But one certainty remained: he had chosen a side at last after years of hiding from such choices. As darkness fell across the desert, Thad's head drooped lower over his saddle. Behind them, the ancient canyon kept its secrets indifferent to the dramas of men. Ahead, Fort Bowie awaited, and whatever reckoning would come with the dawn. Fort Bowie squatted on the landscape like a predator, its adobe walls pale against the darkening sky. As Morrison's small party approached, Thad drifted in and out of consciousness, the wound in his side having bled steadily throughout the journey. Only the ropes binding him to the saddle kept him from falling. "He won't last the night without a surgeon," one of the soldiers murmured, eyeing Thad's ashen face. "He'll last long enough," Morrison replied coldly. "I need what he knows." The fort's gates swung open at their approach. Unlike many frontier outposts, Fort Bowie was substantial, a permanent installation reflecting the Army's long-term commitment to pacifying Apache territory. Soldiers snapped to attention as Morrison entered, his reputation for ruthlessness preceding him. "Take him to the stockade," Morrison ordered. "Have Dr. Perkins see to his wound. I want him conscious for questioning." Rough hands untied Thad and dragged him from the saddle. His wooden leg, damaged in the earlier fight, splintered completely as he hit the ground. He bit back a groan as they hauled him across the parade ground toward a squat building of adobe and timber. Inside, the stockade was divided into several cells. Most stood empty, a testament to Morrison's preference for immediate justice rather than prisoners. They threw Thad onto a thin pallet in the farthest cell, the iron door clanging shut behind him. He lay still, gathering what remained of his strength, cataloging his situation through the fog of pain. Gunshot wound to the right side. Not immediately fatal, but continuing to bleed. Broken wooden leg. 3 cracked ribs from Morrison's boot. Dehydration. And now fever beginning to burn through his veins like liquid fire. A harsh laugh drew his attention to the adjacent cell. "You look like hell warmed over, white man." Thad turned his head with effort. In the dim light, he made out a figure seated against the far wall of the neighboring cell. An elderly Apache man, his face deeply lined, but his eyes sharp and clear. "Feel about the same," Thad managed. "Morrison's work." The old man nodded toward Thad's wounds. "More or less." The Apache grunted. "He will let you die slowly. It is his way." Before Thad could respond, the outer door opened again. A thin man with spectacles entered, carrying a medical bag, Dr. Perkins, presumably. A young soldier accompanied him, rifle at the ready. "I'm here to treat the prisoner," the doctor announced, his voice revealing an Eastern education at odds with the frontier setting. The cell door opened just enough to admit the doctor, then clanged shut again. The guard remained outside, watchful. "Captain Morrison instructed me to ensure you survive the night," Dr. Perkins said without preamble, kneeling beside Thad's pallet. "Though I suspect his concern is not humanitarian." He opened his bag and began cutting away Thad's blood-soaked shirt. "The bullet?" Thad asked through clenched teeth. "Passed clean through. You're fortunate." The doctor's fingers probed the wound, causing Thad to hiss in pain. Though fortunate is relative in Fort Bowie's stockade. As the doctor cleaned and bandaged the wound, Thad studied him. Perkins was younger than he'd first appeared, perhaps 35, with prematurely gray hair and the haunted eyes of a man who'd seen too much suffering. "You don't approve of Morrison," Thad observed quietly. Perkins's hands stilled momentarily. "My approval is irrelevant. I'm a military doctor. I go where ordered. And treat whoever needs treatment." Thad glanced toward the old Apache in the next cell. Perkins followed his gaze, his expression hardening. "Chief Nahilze has refused my assistance, prefers to die of pneumonia rather than accept white medicine." "Can you blame him?" the old chief rasped, overhearing them. "I can blame many things," Perkins replied wearily, "but not a man's pride." He finished bandaging Thad's side. The wound is clean for now, but infection is likely in these conditions. I've left laudanum for the pain. Save it, Thad said. Need a clear head. Perkins nodded, understanding. Morrison will question you tomorrow. He's riding out at dawn to pursue those Apache women based on information you provided. He raised an eyebrow. Information I suspect was deliberately misleading. Thad said nothing, but his eyes confirmed the doctor's suspicion. Thought so, Perkins murmured. Whatever your game is, Garrett, I hope it's worth dying for. He gathered his supplies and called for the guard to let him out. At the door, he paused. One more thing. There's a telegraph operator here, young fellow named Sullivan, sympathetic to the Apache. If you had a message that needed sending, he might be persuaded. With that cryptic remark, Perkins departed, leaving Thad alone with the dying chief and a spark of possibility he hadn't dared hope for. You know, Nalnish, Nahilzai said once they were alone again. It wasn't a question. Thad turned to face him. How did you— Morrison speaks carelessly around those he believes do not matter. The old man's eyes glittered in the dim light. He hunts my granddaughter with uncommon hatred. Granddaughter, Thad repeated, surprised. Nalnish is your granddaughter. Nahilzai nodded once. Daughter of my daughter, born during the last moon of freedom before the reservation. She carries the blood of chiefs. Pride and sorrow mingled in his voice. She also carries evidence that could destroy Morrison and his Washington masters. She's headed for Tucson, Thad confirmed, deciding to trust the old man. Newspaper there, man named Reynolds. Good, Nahilzai said softly. Morrison believes your lie about Mexico. It gives her time. The Thad tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. How did you end up here? I refuse to lead Morrison to the last free Apache bands hiding in the mountains. So he brings me here to die, where my people can see what becomes of defiance. He coughed a wet, rattling sound. I will not give him that satisfaction much longer. There may be another way, Thad said slowly, thinking of Dr. Perkins's hint about the telegraph operator. If we could get word to Tucson ahead of Morrison— Nahilzai's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. Tell me your plan, wooden leg warrior. Perhaps we shall cheat death one more day. The opportunity came near midnight when the guard changed. The new sentry was young, barely 20, with a farmer's calloused hands and uneasy eyes that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. Water? Thad called weakly from his pallet. Please? The guard hesitated, then approached with a ladle from the water bucket. Closer, Thad gasped. Can't. Sit up. As the young soldier leaned in to offer the water, Thad's hand shot out with surprising strength, grasping the boy's collar and yanking him against the bars. Make a sound, and I'll snap your neck, Thad whispered, though it was mostly bluff. In his condition, he could barely snap a twig. The terror in the boy's eyes suggested the threat was convincing nonetheless. What's your name, son? Thad asked, maintaining his grip. Private Thomas Wilson, the soldier stammered. Well, Thomas, I need you to deliver a message to the telegraph operator Sullivan. I can't. You can, Thad interrupted, because what's happening here is wrong, and deep down you know it. Morrison is stealing from the Apache, leaving them to starve. Children, Thomas, dying of hunger while he profits. Doubt flickered across the young man's face. Those are serious accusations, and there's proof on its way to Tucson, unless Morrison stops it. Thad tightened his grip slightly. I'm not asking you to free me. Just deliver a message. Wilson swallowed hard. What message Tell Sullivan to telegraph Michael Reynolds at the Arizona Star in Tucson. Tell him 2 Apache women are coming with evidence against Morrison and Senator Holloway. Tell him to meet them at Rattlesnake Creek Ford east of town. They'll need protection." "That's treason," Wilson whispered. "That's justice," Thad countered. "And you know it, or you wouldn't still be listening." A long moment passed as the young soldier wrestled with his conscience. Finally, he nodded once. "I'll tell him," he said quietly. "But that's all." "If you're caught, I never saw you," Thad finished, releasing his grip. "Go!" Wilson straightened. His uniform looked around nervously, then hurried out of the stockade. Whether he would deliver the message or report Thad's actions to Morrison remained to be seen. In the next cell, Nahilzai smiled thinly. "Perhaps there is hope yet, wooden-leg warrior." "Perhaps," Thad agreed, though hope felt like a luxury he could ill afford. He settled back on his pallet, pain throbbing through his side in time with his heartbeat. Dawn was still hours away, and with it would come Morrison's interrogation, a prospect Thad had no illusions about surviving. But if the telegraph reached Tucson, if Reynolds met Nalnish and Dispa with the evidence, maybe his death would purchase something worthwhile after all. He closed his eyes, falling into a fitful sleep, filled with dreams of tall Apache women, ancient tunnels, and the ghosts of all the men he'd killed and failed to save across 2 decades of America's bloody expansion westward. Dawn arrived with the jangling of keys and the heavy tread of boots. Thad awoke instantly, years of military training overriding his body's desperate need for continued rest. His wound had bled through the bandages during the night, and fever burned hotter beneath his skin. The door swung open to reveal Captain Morrison, accompanied by 2 burly sergeants. Morrison's face bore the satisfied expression of a predator scenting wounded prey. "Captain Garrett," he said with mock formality, "I trust you slept well." "Like a baby," Thad replied hoarsely. "Your hospitality is overwhelming." Morrison's false smile vanished. "Enough pleasantries. You're going to tell me everything about these Apache women, their evidence, and their escape network to Mexico." "And why would I do that?" One of the sergeants stepped forward, displaying a set of brass knuckles with ugly brown stains Thad recognized as dried blood. "Because Sergeant Donnelly here has a particular talent for persuasion," Morrison answered. "He was a butcher before joining the Army. Knows exactly where to strike for maximum pain without inducing unconsciousness." Thad met Morrison's gaze evenly. "I've been interrogated by Confederate officers at Libby Prison, men who elevated torture to an art form. Your butcher doesn't frighten me." Morrison's jaw tightened. "We'll see." He nodded to the sergeants who hauled Thad upright and dragged him from the cell, his remaining legs scraping painfully along the ground. They took him to another room within the stockade, one without windows, its adobe walls stained dark in places that suggested Donnelly had practiced his talent here before. An iron ring protruded from the ceiling with manacles attached. "String him up," Morrison ordered. The sergeants chained Thad's wrists to the manacles, then hoisted him until his remaining foot barely touched the floor. The position put agonizing pressure on his wounded side, fresh blood seeping through the bandages. Morrison circled him slowly. "Let's begin simply. The women's destination in Mexico." Thad remained silent, mentally preparing for what was to come. The first blow caught him in the kidney, Donnelly's brass knuckles driving into the soft tissue with practiced precision. Pain exploded through Thad's body, but he bit back a cry. "Their contact in Mexico," Morrison demanded. Another blow, this time to the liver. Then the ribs. Then perilously close to the gunshot wound. Thad lost track of the questions and the blows. Blood filled his mouth as his teeth cut into his cheek. Still, he maintained his silence, retreating to the same mental fortress that had sustained him through Libby Prison's horrors. After what seemed like hours, Morrison signaled Donnelly to stop. The captain approached, grasping Thad's hair to lift his head. "Impressive tolerance," Morrison admitted. "But everyone breaks eventually." Thad spat blood onto Morrison's immaculate uniform. "Go to hell!" Morrison stepped back, wiping the spatter from his jacket with a handkerchief. "Perhaps a different approach." He turned to the second sergeant. "Bring in the old Apache." Moments later, they dragged Chief Nahilze into the room. The old man stood proudly despite his illness, refusing to show weakness. "Perhaps you'll be more forthcoming when it's someone else suffering for your silence," Morrison suggested. "I understand you've developed a rapport with the chief." Thad felt cold dread settle in his stomach. "He knows nothing." "Perhaps not," Morrison agreed. "But he'll still scream when Donnelly starts breaking his fingers." Nahilze met Thad's eyes. "Do not speak, wooden-leg warrior," he said in Apache. "My journey is nearly complete. Yours continues." Morrison, not understanding the language, nodded to Donnelly. "Begin." The sergeant stepped toward Nahilze, brass knuckles raised. "Wait," Thad gasped. "I'll tell you what you want to know." Morrison held up a hand, stopping Donnelly. "I'm listening." "The women," Thad began, speaking slowly as if defeated. "They're heading for Nogales. Apache smuggler named Victorio helps them cross." "Victorio was killed last year," Morrison said suspiciously. "His brother," Thad improvised, "calls himself Victorio now, continues the network." Morrison studied him. "And this evidence they supposedly carry, records from San Carlos, supply manifests showing discrepancies, names, dates." Thad let his head droop, as if the admission had drained the last of his strength. "And Holloway, how is he implicated?" "Letters," Thad mumbled. "To you, discussing arrangements." A flicker of genuine concern crossed Morrison's face. He'd written such letters, Thad realized with grim satisfaction. The captain was now wondering if they had somehow been intercepted. "Where are these letters now?" Morrison demanded. "With Nalnish. Hidden. In her dress." Morrison paced the room, considering this information. "Nogales is 3 days' hard ride. We can intercept them before they cross." He turned to the sergeants. "Prepare a detachment, 20 men. We leave within the hour." "What about them?" Donnelly asked, gesturing to Thad and Nahilze. Morrison glanced at Thad's battered form. "The old man returns to his cell. As for Garrett," he studied the hanging man thoughtfully. "Leave him here. No food, no water. We'll see if he's alive when we return." "And if he's not," the sergeant asked, "then we'll say he attacked a guard and was killed trying to escape." Morrison smiled coldly. A traitor's death for a traitor. They cut Thad down, letting him collapse in a heap on the packed earth floor. As they dragged Nahilze out, the old chief caught Thad's eye one last time. "Courage, wooden-leg warrior," he said in Apache. "The canyon spirits are with you." Then they were gone, the heavy door bolting shut, leaving Thad alone in the darkness with his pain and the desperate hope that his gamble would pay off. Time lost meaning in the windowless room. Thad drifted between consciousness and delirium as fever gripped him more tightly. The gunshot wound had definitely infected. He could smell the sweet, sour odor of corruption when he changed positions. He had managed to crawl to the wall, propping himself against it to ease the pressure on his injuries. Every breath sent daggers of pain through his broken ribs. Without water, his tongue had swollen, making even swallowing difficult. In his fevered state, the walls seemed to shift and breathe. Shadows took form. Confederate soldiers from Gettysburg, Apache, warriors from long-ago skirmishes, his dead wife smiling sadly from the corner. "Thad," she whispered, her voice achingly familiar. "Don't give up." "Margaret," he croaked, reaching toward the apparition. "I'm sorry." "Not your fault," the phantom replied, though her form was already fading. "None of it was your fault." Then she was gone, and Thad was alone again with the pain and darkness. Later hours or days, he couldn't tell, the bolt on the door scraped open. Thad tensed, expecting Morrison's return, but instead, the thin figure of Dr. Perkins slipped inside, carrying his medical bag. "Christ almighty," the doctor muttered, seeing Thad's condition. He knelt quickly, opening his bag. "You look 3/4 dead." "Feel 4/4?" Thad rasped. Perkins produced a canteen, helping Thad take small sips. The water was like liquid heaven on his parched throat. "Morrison's gone?" Thad asked when he could speak again. Perkins nodded, cutting away the blood-soaked bandages. "Rode out 2 hours ago, heading for Nogales with most of the garrison." He wrinkled his nose at the infected wound. "This needs proper cleaning and drainage, or you won't last another day." "Why, help me," Thad managed. The doctor's hands worked efficiently as he spoke. "Because I've spent 3 years watching Morrison's cruelty and telling myself I was just following orders." His voice hardened. 3 years of treating Apache children dying from diseases that simple medicine could have prevented had supplies not been diverted. He finished cleaning the wound, then began repacking it with fresh bandages soaked in an antiseptic solution that burned like fire. "Your message reached Sullivan," Perkins continued more quietly. "He sent the telegraph to Tucson and received a reply." Hope flared in Thad's chest. "What did it say?" "Reynolds got the message. He's sending men to meet the women at Rattlesnake Creek." Perkins tightened the bandage. "But there's more. The women never arrived in Tucson. They were intercepted 10 miles outside the city." Thad's heart sank. "Morrison?" "No. Holloway's men. Private contractors, former rangers mostly. They've been searching every trail while Morrison focused on the Mexico theory." Perkins's expression grew grim. "Reynolds's sources say they caught one of the women. The taller one, Nalnish. And Dispa. The evidence? Unknown. The scarred woman wasn't with Nalnish when they took her." Perkins packed away his supplies. "They're holding Nalnish at Holloway's private ranch outside Tucson until the senator returns from Washington. He's due tomorrow." The implications were clear. Once Holloway arrived, Nalnish would be interrogated, then disposed of. Any evidence would be destroyed, the entire affair buried. "I need to get out of here," Thad said, struggling to rise despite his injuries. Perkins pressed him back down. "In your condition, you wouldn't make it to the gates, let alone to Tucson." "Then I'll die trying," Thad growled. "I didn't survive Gettysburg Libby Prison and Morrison's hospitality to give up now." The doctor studied him, then sighed heavily. "There might be a way, but it's dangerous, and not just for you." "I'm listening." "Chief Nahilzai died an hour ago," Perkins said quietly. "Pneumonia finally took him. I'm supposed to supervise his burial outside the fort walls." "And," Thad prompted, sensing where this was heading, "and there's a sympathetic Sergeant Johnson who lost a brother to Morrison's negligence in Apache territory last year. With his help, we might be able to get you out in the burial detail." Perkins looked uncertain. "But after that, you're on your own. No horse, no weapons, 50 miles to Tucson in your condition." "I'll manage," Thad insisted. "What about my wooden leg? Broken beyond repair, but Johnson might be able to find you a crutch." Thad considered the plan. It was desperate, nearly suicidal, given his physical state. But Nalnisha's life hung in the balance, along with any hope of justice for the Apache people Morrison and Holloway had systematically abused. When? He asked simply. Sunset, Perkins replied. They want the old man buried quickly before his spirit can trouble the fort. Nahilzi would appreciate the irony, Thad said with grim humor. His death providing cover for one last act of defiance. Perkins helped Thad drink more water, then gave him a small dose of laudanum, just enough to dull the worst of the pain without clouding his mind. I'll return with Johnson at sunset, the doctor promised, rising to leave. If you change your mind, I won't, Thad interrupted. But doctor, thank you, for remembering your oath when others forgot theirs. Perkins paused at the door, his face shadowed. 3 years of silence makes me complicit, Garrett. This isn't redemption. Just the bare minimum of human decency delivered far too late. After he left, Thad leaned back against the wall, marshalling what little strength remained in his battered body. 50 miles to Tucson. Through Apache territory with no horse one leg and enemies in every direction. Impossible odds. But then he'd faced those before at Little Round Top, when Joshua Chamberlain had ordered the 20th Maine to fix bayonets and charge downhill against overwhelming Confederate forces. They'd succeeded then because they'd had no choice but to succeed, just as he had no choice now. The fever still burned through him, but Thad felt a strange clarity descending. Whether it was approaching death or newfound purpose, he couldn't say. But as the shadows lengthened toward sunset, Thaddeus Garrett prepared himself for one final campaign, one that would end in either justice or a lonely grave in the Arizona desert. Either way, he would not go quietly. Dying light painted Fort Bowie's walls blood red as 4 soldiers carried Chief Nahilzai's blanket-wrapped body through the western gate. Dr. Perkins followed medical bag in hand, accompanied by a 5th soldier supporting a limping, hunched figure Thad disguised in a filthy Apache blanket, his face obscured. "Burial detail only," the gate sergeant called. "Be back by full dark, or you're locked out till morning." Sergeant Johnson, a stocky man with a perpetual scowl, nodded curtly. "Won't take long to plant one dead Apache." They proceeded in silence to a small rise several hundred yards from the fort, the unofficial burial ground for those who died in Army custody. Dozens of unmarked mounds testified to Morrison's brutal regime. Once out of sight of the fort, Johnson's demeanor changed. "We need to hurry," he said, helping Thad stand straighter. "The night patrol starts in 20 minutes." They lowered Nahilzai's body into a shallow grave. Despite the urgency, Perkins insisted on a moment of dignity, closing the old chief's eyes and arranging his hands across his chest. "I didn't know you were religious, Doc," Johnson remarked. "I'm not," Perkins replied quietly, "but I've seen enough men die without respect. Not this one." While the soldiers filled the grave, Johnson produced a crude crutch fashioned from a cavalry lance, its metal point removed and replaced with a padded crosspiece. "Best I could manage," he said, handing it to Thad. "It'll do," Thad replied, testing his weight against it. Pain shot through his side, but the crutch held. "What about the patrol routes?" Johnson pointed southeast. "They ride the perimeter nightly. 2-man teams, 2-hour rotations. First patrol takes the northern sector. You've got maybe 90 minutes before they circle to this position." "Water?" Thad asked, aware that dehydration could kill him faster than his wounds. Perkins handed over 2 full canteens. "Drink sparingly. Make it last. And this," Johnson added, passing Thad a revolver, an old Remington .44 with a belt of cartridges. 6 shots. Make them count." The final item was a folded paper that Johnson pressed into Thad's hand. "Rough map to Holloway's ranch, 15 miles southwest of Tucson. The woman's being held there. Thad tucked everything into the blanket he now wore as a makeshift poncho. "Why are you helping me?" he asked Johnson directly. "Risking court-martial may be worse." The sergeant's face hardened. "My brother was stationed at San Carlos, wrote me about the conditions there, children starving, while Morrison and his cronies grew fat. Then he suddenly died of fever." His mouth twisted. "The letter he sent me the week before mentioned he was gathering evidence of supply theft." Thad nodded, understanding all too well. "We need to go," Perkins interrupted anxiously. "The patrol—" "One last thing," Johnson said, handing Thad a small leather pouch. "Hardtack jerky. Not much, but it's something." Thad accepted it gratefully. "How will you explain my disappearance?" "You died during interrogation," Perkins supplied. "We buried your body alongside the chief's. By the time Morrison returns and discovers otherwise, it'll be too late if you succeed." "And if I don't, then we'll likely join you in unmarked graves," Johnson said bluntly. "So do us all a favor and stay alive, Captain." Thad extended his hand, which Johnson clasped firmly. "Godspeed," the sergeant said. Then, to the other soldiers, "Back to the fort. Remember not a word of this to anyone." As the burial detail headed back toward Fort Bowie's imposing silhouette, Thad turned southeast, leaning heavily on his crutch. 50 miles of desert and mountain terrain lay between him and Tucson. Beyond that, Holloway's ranch and whatever fate awaited Nalnish. The first step sent agony through his wounded side. The second was no better. By the 10th, Thad had settled into a rhythm of pain that would be his constant companion in the days ahead. He didn't look back. There was nothing behind him now but death, either Morrison's or his own. The only path left was forward into the gathering darkness of the Arizona night. By dawn, Thad had covered less than 5 miles, a pitiful distance for a healthy man, but a testament to sheer will given his condition. Each step was a negotiation with pain, each breath a shallow compromise, to avoid aggravating his broken ribs. The fever still burned, but the night's cool air had helped. He'd rationed the water carefully, taking small sips at measured intervals. The antiseptic Perkins had packed into his wound seemed to be holding the infection at bay, if only barely. As the eastern sky lightened, Thad sought shelter. Traveling by day, in his condition, would be suicidal. He found a shallow overhang among a cluster of boulders, offering shade and concealment from casual observation. Settling painfully into the recess, he surveyed his position. Fort Bowie was no longer visible behind him, lost among the rolling terrain. Ahead, the land dipped into a broad valley before rising again toward the mountains that separated him from Tucson. 50 miles. At his current pace, 10 days of travel. But Nalnish didn't have 10 days. Once Holloway arrived at his ranch, her time would be measured in hours, not days. Thad needed to move faster, which meant taking risks. Traveling by day despite the heat, using trails despite the possibility of encountering patrols, and most critically, finding a horse. As he chewed a small piece of jerky, Thad studied Johnson's crude map. 8 miles ahead lay Sulphur Springs Station, a stagecoach stop and trading post. There he might find transportation and information. If he pushed hard, he could reach it by nightfall. Decision made, Thad allowed himself 30 minutes of rest, then struggled back to his feet. The sun was now fully risen, promising another brutal day of desert heat. He adjusted the blanket to shade his face and began the painful journey forward, one agonizing step at a time. Midday found Thad collapsed in the meager shade of a stunted mesquite, his body betraying his will. The wound in his side had reopened, fresh blood staining the bandages. The water in his first canteen was nearly gone. His vision swam with fever and exhaustion. "Not here," he muttered to himself. "Not like this." As if in answer, a sound reached him, the rhythmic pounding of hooves on hard-packed earth. Riders approaching from the south. Thad dragged himself behind the mesquite's thin trunk, drawing the Remington with trembling hands. Through the heat haze, he made out 3 riders moving at an easy trot. Not military, their silhouettes lacked the distinctive shape of cavalry. Civilians, then. Perhaps miners or ranchers. Or bounty hunters. Morrison undoubtedly had men watching all approaches to Tucson. As they drew closer, Thad saw they were Mexicans, 2 men and a boy of perhaps 14, leading a pack horse laden with goods. Traders most likely heading to Fort Bowie with supplies. Thad's first instinct was to remain hidden, let them pass. But desperation overrode caution. Without help, he wouldn't survive another day, let alone reach Tucson. Decision made, he holstered the revolver and struggled to his feet, waving weakly as the riders approached. "Ayúdame," he called, using the little Spanish he knew. "Help!" The traders reined in cautiously, hands near their weapons. The older man, gray-bearded, with a face weathered by decades of desert sun, studied Thad with shrewd eyes. "American," he observed in accented English. "What happened to you, senor?" "Ambushed." Thad improvised, leaning heavily on his crutch. "Apache. Took my horse, left me for dead." The Mexican exchanged glances with his companions. "Strange. Apache do not usually leave enemies alive." "I played dead," Thad said, sensing their skepticism. "Please, I need water, a ride to Sulphur Springs. I can pay." He reached slowly into his pocket, producing one of the gold coins Dispa had offered him days earlier. A lifetime ago, it seemed. The sight of gold changed the atmosphere immediately. The older Mexican dismounted, approaching with a canteen. "I am Diego Vargas," he said, offering the water. "My son Miguel and nephew Carlos." He gestured to his companions, who remained mounted, watching warily. "We go to Fort Bowie with supplies. Why do you not return there yourself, if attacked so close?" Thad drank gratefully before answering. "Bad blood between me and the commander. Rather take my chances elsewhere." Vargas's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. "You are the one they search for. Yes, the army man who helped the Apache women." Thad's hand moved instinctively toward his revolver. Vargas raised his palms placatingly. "Peace, senor. We have no love for Captain Morrison or his methods. Many of our people have suffered under his protection." "How do you know about me?" Thad asked cautiously. "Riders from the fort stopped at Sulphur Springs yesterday, asking questions describing a wounded American with one leg who might be heading toward Tucson." Vargas smiled thinly. "They offer $50 for information. A fine sum, but—" He glanced at Thad's gold coin. "Perhaps not fine enough." Relief washed through Thad. "Then you'll help me. For this gold, yes." Vargas took the coin, testing it with his teeth. Satisfied, he nodded to his son. "Miguel, help the American onto your horse. You will ride with Carlos." The teenager dismounted, offering Thad his arm for support. With considerable pain, Thad managed to climb into the saddle the first time he'd been on a horse without being bound to it since Morrison's capture. "Sulphur Springs is dangerous for you now," Vargas said as they resumed their journey. "Morrison's men watch the station. We will take the old mine road instead, bypass the settlement." "I need to reach Tucson," Thad explained. "Urgently." Vargas shook his head. "In your condition, impossible without rest and proper medicine." He considered for a moment. "My sister lives in a small rancho 10 miles from here. She knows healing plants the old ways. Perhaps 2 days there you will be strong enough to continue." "I don't have 2 days," Thad said grimly. "A woman's life depends on me reaching Tucson by tomorrow night." Interest sharpened in Vargas's eyes. "The Apache women, the tall ones," Thad nodded cautiously. "One of them's been captured, being held at Senator Holloway's ranch outside Tucson." The three Mexicans exchanged significant looks. "These women," Carlos ventured, speaking for the first time. "They carried evidence against Morrison and the senator, no, about stealing from the reservation." "How do you know that?" Thad demanded. Vargas chuckled. "My friend in the territory's secrets travel faster than stagecoaches. Many in our community have relatives working at San Carlos or in Tucson. We hear things." "Then you know how important this is?" Thad pressed. "The evidence could stop Morrison, maybe even Holloway." "Men like them are not stopped so easily," Vargas replied, his expression darkening, "but perhaps slowed made to answer for some of their crimes." He studied Thad thoughtfully. "What is your plan once you reach Tucson, one injured man against Holloway's guards?" The question hit uncomfortably close to the hollow space in Thad's planning. He had been so focused on the journey that the impossibility of what came after had remained conveniently abstract. "I'm working on that part," he admitted. Vargas laughed, a rich, genuine sound. "An honest answer. Good. Too many Americans I meet have all the answers before they know the questions." He nodded decisively. "We will help you to Tucson, senor. Not just to my sister's rancho, but all the way." Thad blinked in surprise. "Why would you risk that?" "Because Holloway's men burned my cousin's farm last year, said the land suddenly belonged to the railroad." Vargas's voice hardened. "And because Morrison hanged my nephew for stealing army property when he took one blanket for his sick child." The casual cruelty of frontier justice, Thad had seen it countless times, had sometimes even participated in it during his military years. Names and faces he'd tried to forget resurfaced, now demanding acknowledgement. "I'm sorry," he said inadequately. Vargas shrugged. "Words change nothing. Actions might." He urged his horse to a slightly faster pace. "We will still stop at my sister's. You need medicine, fresh bandages. Then, together, we go to Tucson." They traveled steadily through the afternoon, taking a winding path through arroyos and dry washes to avoid the main trails where patrols might lurk. Thad drifted between alertness and fevered haze, staying in the saddle through stubborn will more than physical strength. By sunset, they reached a small adobe rancho, nestled against a hillside, 3 buildings surrounding a dusty courtyard with a small corral and garden plot, irrigated by a spring that emerged from the rocky slope behind. A woman emerged as they approached Vargas's sister, Luisa. Her initial welcome transformed to concern when she saw Thad's condition. "Get him inside," she ordered, taking charge immediately. "Miguel, heat water. Carlos, fetch my medicines." They helped Thad into the main house, laying him on a narrow bed in a small but immaculately clean room. Luisa cut away the blood-soaked bandages, clicking her tongue disapprovingly at the angry, infected wound. "This man should be dead," she told her brother in Spanish, not realizing Thad understood enough to follow. "The infection is deep." "He is stubborn," Vargas replied. "And his mission is important." Luisa began cleaning the wound with a pungent solution that burned like fire. "Important enough to die for. Perhaps important enough to live for," Vargas countered. She worked methodically, removing Perkins's packing, draining the infection, then applying a poultice of crushed herbs that smelled of sage and something sharper. The pain was excruciating, but Thad bit down on a leather strap and endured. "Rest now," she instructed when finished. "The fever must break before you travel." Tomorrow, Thad insisted weakly. Must leave tomorrow. Louisa shook her head in exasperation. Men always in such a hurry to die. But she did not argue further, simply administering a bitter-tasting tea that soon sent Thad spiraling into deep, dreamless sleep. He awoke to darkness and whispered conversation. Night had fallen, and several people were gathered in the main room of the small house. Thad lay still, listening. Says they're holding her at the senator's ranch, Vargas was explaining to someone. Holloway arrives tomorrow from Washington. The security will be impossible to breach, replied an unfamiliar male voice. Holloway maintains a small army of guards, which is why we need more men, Vargas countered. Perhaps from Los Amigos? Possibly, the stranger conceded. But they would need convincing. This is not their fight. It became their fight when Holloway seized their water rights last year, Vargas argued. Eduardo lost his entire crop. Thad shifted, trying to see the speakers. The movement sent pain lancing through his side, drawing an involuntary gasp. Conversation ceased. Footsteps approached, and Vargas appeared in the doorway. You are awake. Good. We have a visitor you should meet. He stepped aside, revealing a slender Mexican man in his 30s, well-dressed in a manner suggesting education and means. Captain Garrett, this is Javier Morales, Vargas introduced, editor of La Voz Libre Tucson's Spanish-language newspaper. Morales inclined his head. A pleasure, Captain, though I wish it were under better circumstances. You're a long way from Tucson, Thad observed, struggling to sit up. Louisa appeared, helping him with surprising strength for her small frame. Careful with my needlework, she admonished. The poultice needs time to draw out the poison. Morales pulled a chair closer to the bed. I was visiting family in Benson when Diego's message reached me. He said you had information about Senator Holloway and Captain Morrison that might interest me. More than information, Thad replied. Evidence, hard proof of theft, corruption, possibly murder. But it's with an Apache woman named Nalnish, currently held at Holloway's ranch. Morales leaned forward, interest sharpening his features. I've been collecting stories about conditions at San Carlos for months. Witnesses disappear, evidence vanishes, and newspaper editors receive visits suggesting certain topics are better left unexplored. Like Michael Reynolds at the Arizona Star, Thad asked. Surprise flickered across Morales's face. You know, Michael was told to contact him in Tucson, that he'd help the Apache women reach authorities with their evidence. Michael was my friend, Morales said quietly. He was found dead 3 days ago. Robbery gone wrong, according to the sheriff, who happens to be Senator Holloway's cousin. The news hit Thad like a physical blow. His last hope of official support in Tucson, gone. Then there's no one left to help, he said flatly. I didn't say that, Morales corrected. Michael's death only confirms the importance of whatever evidence these women carried. I'm willing to publish it in La Voz Libre, though my newspaper's reach is primarily within the Mexican community. It's a start, Thad acknowledged. But first we need to reach Nalnish, and she's guarded by Holloway's men. Which is why we need more allies, Vargas interjected. Javier knows people in Tucson, those who've suffered under Holloway's land grabs and Morrison's peacekeeping. Morales nodded. Many in both the Mexican and white communities have grievances against these men, but fear has kept them silent. With proper evidence, that might change. A fragile hope kindled in Thad's chest. How many men could you gather? Perhaps 15, 20. Not fighters mostly, but determined. And I can add 5 more from Los Amigos, Vargas added, referring to a nearby Mexican settlement. Good men who know how to use rifles. For the first time since Morrison's capture, Thad felt the outlines of a viable plan taking shape. Not just a desperate suicidal mission, but something with an actual chance of success. "When can we leave?" he asked. "First light," Morales replied. "I have a wagon outside, more comfortable for your condition than horseback." Louisa stepped forward, hands on hips. "His wound needs at least another day." "We don't have another day," Thad interrupted gently. "Holloway arrives tomorrow. Once he does, Nalnish's chances drop from slim to none." The healer sighed in resignation. "Stubborn as rocks, all of you." She fixed Thad with a stern gaze. "I will prepare more medicine for the journey. You will take it exactly as instructed, or I guarantee you'll be dead before reaching Tucson." "Yes, ma'am," Thad agreed, hiding a smile at her motherly ferocity. After she left, Morales leaned closer, lowering his voice. "There's something else you should know. Rumors from Tucson say Holloway's men captured only one Apache woman. The other, the scarred one, escaped during the ambush." "Dispa?" Thad straightened, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "Is she alive? Does she still have the evidence?" "Unknown," Morales admitted. "But there are whispers among the Apache settlements outside Tucson. They speak of a one-eyed warrior woman moving among them gathering support." Hope surged stronger. If Dispa was free and organizing resistance, their odds improved considerably. "We leave at dawn," Thad decided, "and pray we're not already too late." True to his word, Morales had the wagon ready as first light painted the eastern horizon. They'd cushioned a space for Thad among sacks of grain, ostensibly their cargo for market in Tucson, but concealing rifles and ammunition beneath. Louisa provided fresh bandages, medicine, and stern instructions for changing the poultice every 6 hours. The herbs had worked remarkably. Thad's fever had broken during the night, and the angry red streaks spreading from his wound had receded. Vargas and his son would accompany them, while Carlos rode ahead to Los Amigos to rally additional supporters who would meet them outside Tucson. As the small convoy prepared to depart, Thad found himself reflecting on the unlikely alliance forming around him. Mexican farmers and newspapermen, Apache warriors, disaffected soldiers, all united against the corruption embodied by Morrison and Holloway. It reminded him strangely of the patchwork companies he'd led during the war. Farm boys from Maine fighting alongside immigrants from Ireland and Germany, former slaves, and northern factory workers, all discovering common cause despite their differences. Perhaps this, more than anything, was what Morrison and men like him feared most, not just exposure of their crimes, but the solidarity that might emerge in opposition to them. The recognition among supposedly natural enemies that their true adversaries wore uniforms and sat in Washington's halls of power. The wagon lurched into motion, jolting Thad back to painful reality. Tucson lay 30 miles ahead, a journey of 10 hours, if all went well. Beyond that waited Holloway's ranch, Nalnish's imprisonment, and whatever final confrontation would determine all their fates. As the rancho receded behind them, Thad found his hand straying to the pocket, holding his Medal of Honor, the symbol of a nation's recognition that had once meant everything to him. Now it seemed hollow, a token from a government that spoke of liberty while enabling men like Morrison and Holloway to profit from others' suffering. Yet something else had taken root alongside his disillusionment, a sense of purpose stronger than anything he'd felt since the war. Not for country this time, nor even for abstract principles of justice, but for Nalnish and Dispa, for Nahilzai, who died in captivity for Vargas's hanged nephew, and all the others whose names he would never know. The wagon rolled steadily north, carrying its unlikely coalition toward a confrontation that would either bring a measure of justice to the territory or add more unmarked graves to its unforgiving landscape. Either way, there would be no turning back. Twilight shrouded Tucson in purple shadows as Morales's wagon approached from the south. The town had grown substantially since Thad last visited new buildings, rising along the main street, evidence of the railroad's transformative effect. Electric lights glowed in a few windows, symbols of progress pushing into the frontier's darkness. They halted a mile outside town at an abandoned adobe stable, a prearranged meeting point where Carlos waited with 6 men from Los Amigos. The newcomers were hard-faced farmers and ranchers, each carrying a rifle and the wary expression of men accustomed to disappointment from authority. Thad observed them from the wagon as Morales made introductions. These weren't revolutionaries or gunfighters, just ordinary men pushed beyond endurance by injustice. Whether they would stand firm when bullets flew remained to be seen. Holloway's ranch lies 8 miles southwest, Morales reported, approaching the wagon. My contacts confirm he arrived from Washington 2 hours ago. Security is tight, at least 20 guards. Thad struggled to sit upright, the day's travel having depleted his limited reserves. What about Nalnish? Is she still alive? Being held in the main house, Holloway plans to interrogate her personally tonight. Morales hesitated. There's more. The scarred woman Dispa, she's been organizing resistance among the Apache settlements. They've agreed to help. Apache and Mexicans working together. Thad raised an eyebrow. Historic enemies finding common cause. Holloway must be even more hated than I realized. The enemy of my enemy, Vargas commented, joining them. How many Apache, Javier? Perhaps a dozen warriors. Not many remain who can fight. Morales checked his pocket watch. They'll meet us at Rattlesnake Creek at full dark. That gives us 2 hours to finalize our plan. With help, Thad climbed down from the wagon. His wound still throbbed, but Luisa's medicine had worked wonders. He could stand without the crutch now, though walking remained painful. Inside the abandoned stable, Morales spread a crude map across a barrel top. Holloway's ranch sits in a small valley. Main house here with bunkhouses for the workers and guards to the west. Corrals and outbuildings to the north. Approaches? Thad asked, studying the terrain. The main road from Tucson is well patrolled, but there's a dry creek bed that runs behind the property, providing cover to within 500 yards of the house. Thad traced the route with his finger. We'll need a diversion to draw the guards away from the main house. My cousins can handle that, offered one of the Mexican ranchers, a broad-shouldered man named Eduardo. We've worked Holloway's land before. Know where the hay barn sits. A fire there would draw plenty of attention. Thad nodded. Good. While they respond to the fire, a small team enters the main house from the rear to extract Nalnish. And the evidence? Vargas asked. Secondary to getting her out alive, Thad replied firmly. But if she still has it, all the better. The men gathered closer as Thad outlined positions, timing signals. Despite his civilian dress and obvious injuries, the natural authority of command settled over him once more, a role he hadn't filled since Gettysburg yet, which fit like a well-worn glove. As the meeting concluded, Morales pulled Thad aside. There's something we haven't discussed, he said quietly. Holloway himself. The senator is untouchable, legally speaking. Even with evidence of corruption, he has too many connections in Washington. I'm not interested in legal remedies anymore, Thad replied, his voice hardening. Holloway, Morrison, they've operated beyond the law for years. Perhaps justice should meet them on the same ground. Morales studied him carefully. That's a dangerous sentiment, Captain. These are dangerous times. Thad checked the Remington, ensuring all 6 chambers were loaded. Let's move out. We have a rendezvous to keep. Rattlesnake Creek carved a winding path through mesquite and palo verde, its banks offering concealment from prying eyes. Thad and the others arrived just as full darkness descended, the moon still below the horizon. They waited in tense silence, the Mexicans exchanging uneasy glances at every sound from the surrounding brush. Apache territory, even friendly. Apache held generations of memories best forgotten. "They won't come," Eduardo muttered after 30 minutes. "Why would they trust us?" As if in answer, a figure materialized from the darkness, tall, imposing, with a scarred face and single piercing eye. Dispa. Thad stepped forward, relief washing through him. "You made it, and you survived Morrison," Dispa replied, her voice betraying surprise. "Impressive for a one-legged white man." Behind her, more shadows separated from the night, Apache warriors' faces, painted for battle, moving with the silent grace of natural predators. Among them, Thad recognized Running Wolf, no longer in army uniform, but dressed in traditional Apache clothing. "Morrison," Thad asked him, "still hunting ghosts near the Mexican border?" Running Wolf replied with grim satisfaction. "By the time he realizes his mistake, it will be too late." Dispa stepped closer, examining Thad's wound and general condition. "You should be dead." "Been hearing that a lot lately," Thad said dryly. "Stubborn, I guess." The ghost of a smile touched her scarred face. "Like an old mule." She sobered quickly. "Nalnish is alive, but not for long. Holloway brought a special interrogator from Washington, a man known for extracting information by any means. The evidence? Safe." Dispa touched a pouch at her waist. "We separated it before they caught us. Nalnish carried blank papers as decoy." Thad felt a surge of admiration for their foresight. "So Holloway doesn't know you have the real documents." "He suspects. Why else would he keep Nalnish alive?" Dispa's single eye glittered with cold fury. "He believes she knows where I am, where the evidence is hidden. Then our priority is extracting her before the interrogation begins," Thad decided, turning back to the assembled group. "Morales, have your contacts in town delivered the message to the newspaper offices?" The editor nodded. "As instructed, representatives from the Arizona Star and Territorial Gazette will be at the Tucson courthouse at midnight." "Good. Now we move." Thad addressed the unlikely alliance gathered in the darkness, Mexican farmers, Apache warriors, and a handful of others drawn together by common cause. "You all know the plan. Eduardo's group creates the diversion at the hay barn. Dispa leads the Apache warriors in a flanking maneuver to eliminate perimeter guards. Vargas Morales and I enter the main house to extract Nalnish." "And Holloway?" Running Wolf asked, his voice carrying the edge of personal vengeance. Thad met his gaze steadily. "Justice is our primary goal, but if Holloway resists—" He left the implication hanging. No one raised further questions. The time for debate had passed. Only action remained. As the group prepared to move out, Dispa approached Thad again, her expression unreadable in the darkness. "You have changed, Wooden Leg Warrior," she observed. "The man who reluctantly sheltered us at his ranch would not lead such a mission." "Maybe I'm just settling debts," Thad replied. Dispa shook her head. "No, you have found purpose again. I recognize it because Nalnish helped me find mine many years ago." She extended her hand, palm up, revealing a small leather pouch. "Medicine, for strength when you most need it. Chew the leaves when your body begins to fail." Thad accepted the gift, tucking it inside his shirt. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," she replied gravely. "The land that never forgives has not finished testing you." With that cryptic warning, she melted back into the darkness, gathering her warriors for the approach to Holloway's ranch. The ranch sprawled across a small valley, its main house gleaming white in the newly risen moon. Lanterns illuminated the grounds, revealing armed guards patrolling with the discipline of men expecting trouble. From his position behind a cluster of boulders 500 yards from the house, Thad observed through a battered field glass. The security was indeed formidable. He counted 16 guards visible from this angle alone. "More than we anticipated," Morales whispered beside him. "Holloway's nervous," Thad replied. "He knows the evidence is still out there." On his other side, Vargas checked his rifle for the third time. "Eduardo and his cousins are in position at the hay barn. Dispa's warriors have encircled the perimeter." "Then we wait for the signal," Thad said, eyes never leaving the main house where Nalnish was held. "Once the diversion begins, we move fast and quiet. No unnecessary killing." The minutes stretched into an hour as they waited for optimal conditions. The moon rose higher, casting silver light across the valley. Guard rotations changed. A rider arrived at the main house, a tall man in an expensive Eastern suit, who could only be Senator Edward Holloway himself. "Interrogation's about to begin," Thad murmured. "We're out of time." As if hearing his urgency, a flicker of orange light appeared at the northern edge of the property. Within seconds, it blossomed into a roaring blaze as the hay barn erupted in flames. Shouts of alarm spread across the ranch. Guards ran toward the fire, orders bellowed in the night. The diversion had begun. "Now," Thad commanded, rising from cover. The three men moved swiftly down the slope, using the dry creek bed for concealment. Thad's wounded side protested every step, but determination pushed the pain aside. At the property's edge, they paused as two guards ran past, heading toward the growing inferno. From the east came the distinctive crack of rifle fire, Dispa's warriors engaging the perimeter guards, drawing even more attention away from the main house. "Back entrance," Thad directed, pointing to a servant's door partially hidden by a trellis of climbing roses. They reached it unchallenged, finding it locked. Vargas produced a heavy pry bar, and with one powerful thrust splintered the frame. The door swung open to reveal a darkened kitchen. Inside, they froze at the sound of voices from deeper within the house, raised in argument, one cultured and demanding, the other defiant, despite obvious pain. "That's Nalnish," Thad whispered, recognizing the second voice. They advanced cautiously through the kitchen into a central hallway, following the voices to an ornate study at the front of the house. The door stood ajar, allowing them to glimpse the scene within. Nalnish was tied to a chair, her proud face bruised but unbowed. Before her stood a slender man in his 50s, impeccably dressed with silver hair and the confident posture of power accustomed to obedience, Senator Edward Holloway. A third figure, bulky and professional in his movements, stood to one side, arranging implements on a small table. "This can end quickly, my dear," Holloway was saying, his tone reasonable, almost paternal. "Simply tell us where your companion took the documents, and you'll be escorted safely to the reservation." "There is no safety on the reservation," Nalnish replied, her voice steady despite her condition. "Only slow death while men like you grow rich." Holloway sighed theatrically. "Mr. Pinkerton, perhaps another demonstration is in order." The bulky man stepped forward, selecting a metal implement from the table. Thad had seen such tools during the war interrogation devices designed to cause maximum pain without permanent damage. His blood ran cold at the thought of what Nalnish had already endured. "No more demonstrations," Thad announced, stepping into the doorway, Remington leveled at Holloway's chest. Vargas and Morales flanked him, rifles ready. Shock registered on the senator's aristocratic features, quickly masked by practiced composure. "Captain Garrett, I presume Morrison described you." though he apparently exaggerated your imminent demise. Sorry to disappoint, Thad replied, advancing into the room. Untie her now. The Pinkerton agent made a subtle movement toward a shoulder holster. Thad shifted his aim. Try it, and you'll be dead before your hand reaches the gun. Holloway raised a placating hand. No need for bloodshed, gentlemen. I'm sure we can reach an accommodation. His eyes assessed Thad's companions, recognizing Morales. Ah, the crusading editor. And local malcontents, I see. Quite the coalition you've assembled, Captain. Untie her, Thad repeated, his voice hardening. Of course. Holloway nodded to the Pinkerton agent, who reluctantly moved to release Nalnish's bonds. But consider your position carefully. You've assaulted a United States senator on private property. That's a hanging offense, regardless of whatever grievances you believe justify your actions. Nalnish stood as the ropes fell away. Her tall frame unsteady but dignified. Her eyes met Thad's, communicating silent thanks. We have the evidence, Senator, Thad said. Ledgers documenting years of theft from San Carlos. Correspondence between you and Morrison planning the relocation of Apache to uninhabitable land, so railroad interests, your interests, could claim their territory. Unsubstantiated accusations. Holloway dismissed, though a flicker of concern crossed his features. The word of savages and malcontents against a decorated senator. Do you really believe that would stand in any court? Perhaps not in Washington, Morales interjected. But the court of public opinion here in the territory might view matters differently, especially with 3 territorial newspapers ready to publish the full documentation tomorrow morning. For the first time, genuine alarm registered in Holloway's expression. The territorial press is inconsequential. But Eastern newspapers do pay attention when a senator is implicated in mass starvation and land theft, Thad countered. Wire services carry such stories nationwide. Even your friends in Washington might find you inconvenient when the full story emerges. A calculated gamble, Thad was banking on Holloway's self-interest, overriding any impulse toward martyrdom. The senator was a political animal, not a fighting man. Self-preservation would be his primary instinct. Sure enough, Holloway's demeanor shifted subtly toward negotiation. What exactly do you want, Captain? Money, a percentage of certain business interests? Justice, Thad said simply, starting with your immediate resignation from the Senate and withdrawal of all land claims against Apache territory. Holloway actually laughed. Preposterous! You overestimate your leverage, sir. Do I? Thad nodded toward the window, where the orange glow of the burning barn illuminated dozens of figures converging on the house, Apache warriors and Mexican ranchers united in common purpose. Your guards are occupied or neutralized. Your isolation is complete. And the evidence leaves Tucson for newspaper offices across the country tomorrow morning, unless we reach an agreement tonight. The senator's practiced composure cracked further. He moved to his desk, pouring himself a generous whiskey with a hand that trembled slightly. You understand nothing about governance in the territories, he said after a steadying drink. Progress demands difficult choices, resources allocated where they generate the greatest benefit for civilization. The Apache are a dying people. Progress will sweep them aside regardless of my actions or yours. Yet you found it necessary to accelerate that process for personal profit, Nalnish said, her voice stronger now. Children died of hunger, while you diverted food supplies meant for our people. Collateral damage in the march of civilization, Holloway replied dismissively. History will vindicate. The window exploded inward as a rifle shot shattered both glass and the room's tense standoff. The Pinkerton agent crumpled, blood blossoming across his chest. Chaos erupted. Thad shoved Nalnish toward Vargas, shouting, "Get her out!" as he turned to face this new threat. more gunfire peppered the house from outside, not from their allies, but from another direction entirely. "Morrison," Holloway said, his face pale with genuine fear now. He must have returned from the border. And the implication registered immediately. Morrison would eliminate everyone, including Holloway, to bury the evidence permanently. "Back door," Thad ordered, covering their retreat, as Morales and Vargas helped Nalnish toward the kitchen. Holloway hesitated, torn between remaining in his home or fleeing with his enemies. "They'll kill you too, Senator," Thad warned. "Morrison can't afford witnesses, not even you." Another volley of gunfire peppered the study, splintering wood and shattering a portrait of Holloway in senatorial dignity. The decision made itself. The senator hurried after them toward the rear of the house. The kitchen door opened to reveal Running Wolf, his rifle ready. "Morrison," he reported tersely, 30 men attacking from the west. Our warriors are engaging, but we're outnumbered." "Where's Disba?" Nalnish asked urgently. "Leading the defense at the north perimeter. She sent me to find you." Running Wolf's eyes hardened when he saw Holloway. "The white-haired snake comes with us. For now," Thad confirmed. "He's our insurance." They emerged into the chaos of the ranch yard. The hay barn blazed furiously, illuminating the entire valley. Gunfire erupted from multiple directions as Morrison's forces engaged with their makeshift alliance of Apache and Mexicans. Caught between two enemies, Holloway's remaining guards had either fled or joined forces with Morrison. "To the creek bed," Thad directed. "It's our only path out." They made it 50 yards before a bullet kicked up dirt at Thad's feet. He turned to see Captain Morrison himself, advancing with 6 soldiers, rifles raised. "Hold it right there, Garrett," Morrison shouted, his face twisted with rage and triumph. "It's over!" Thad pushed Nalnish behind him, raising his Remington. "Let them go, Morrison. Your quarrel's with me. My quarrel's with traitors and savages," Morrison spat. "And I intend to finish it tonight." His eyes found Holloway. "Senator A, surprised to find you in such company." "Captain, thank God," Holloway began, stepping forward, with hands raised placatingly. "These men forced me." The crack of Morrison's pistol cut off the senator's words. Holloway staggered, looking down in disbelief at the red stain spreading across his expensive suit, before collapsing face first into the dust. "Loose ends," Morrison explained coldly to his stunned audience. The senator had become a liability, too willing to compromise, too concerned with appearances. He gestured to his men. "Kill them all. No survivors, no witnesses." As the soldiers raised their rifles, a war cry split the night high, ululating, chilling in its primal fury. Disba appeared from the darkness like an avenging spirit leading a charge of Apache warriors. They fell upon Morrison's men with devastating effect, war clubs and knives finding flesh before the soldiers could react. Thad seized the moment, firing his Remington at Morrison. The shot went wide as pain lanced through his wounded side, the exertions of the night finally overcoming Luisa's medicine. Morrison returned fire, the bullet grazing Thad's arm. He staggered, but remained upright. Dispa's leather pouch of medicine suddenly remembered. With trembling fingers, he extracted a few leaves, chewing them quickly, as Nalnish dragged him toward the relative safety of a stone wall. The effect was almost immediate, not healing, but a surge of clarity and strength that pushed pain into the background. Thad rose, reloading the Remington as Morrison advanced, the captain's face twisted with hatred. "I should have killed you at Fort Bowie," Morrison snarled, firing again. The bullet struck Thad's wooden leg, splintering it further, but causing no new injury. He returned fire, catching Morrison in the shoulder, spinning him halfway around. The captain recovered quickly, raising his pistol for another shot. Before he could fire, Running Wolf appeared behind him, war club raised. Morrison sensed the danger starting to turn, but too late. The club descended with terrible force, dropping the captain to his knees. Running Wolf raised the club for a killing blow, vengeance for his slaughtered family within his grasp. "Wait!" Thad called, limping forward. "We need him alive, to testify." The Apache warrior's face contorted with rage and indecision, the club trembling in his raised hand. For a long moment, personal vengeance battled with larger justice. Finally, Running Wolf lowered the club. "You are right, wooden leg warrior. Death is too quick for this one. Let him live to see his shame." They bound Morrison securely, the captain's curses fading to sullen silence as he realized the extent of his defeat. Around them, the battle was ending, Morrison's men either dead, captured, or fled into the night. The unlikely alliance of Apache and Mexicans had prevailed against superior numbers through surprise and determination. Dispa approached, blood streaking her scarred face. None of it her own. She embraced Nalnish fiercely, the sisters reunited at last. Then she turned to Thad. "You kept your promise," she said simply. "We all did," Thad replied, looking around at their improbable coalition. "Now comes the harder part, making justice stick." Morales stepped forward, hope and caution mingling in his expression. "If we can get Holloway's confession, he's still alive barely, and Morrison's testimony along with the documentary evidence, the territorial courts might actually act," Thad finished, especially with 3 newspapers forcing the issue publicly. Dawn was breaking as they organized their departure, the wounded, tended prisoners secured, evidence gathered. Holloway, clinging to life, was loaded into a wagon along with Morrison. The remaining Apache and Mexican fighters dispersed quickly, fading back to their respective communities before army reinforcements could arrive. Thad found himself standing alone with Nalnish and Dispa as the eastern sky brightened from purple to gold. "What will you do now?" he asked them. Nalnish looked toward the mountains where the last free Apache bands still roamed. "Return to our people. Help them adapt to changing times without losing who they are." Her eyes met his. "And you, Thaddeus Garrett, back to your ranch." Thad shook his head. "Nothing left there but ashes, I suspect. Besides," he considered the strange path that had led him here from reluctant savior to revolutionary. "I think there's more work to be done. The territories are full of men like Morrison and Holloway." "You have found your purpose again," Dispa observed, echoing her earlier words. "The spirits guided you well, wooden leg warrior." "Perhaps they did," Thad acknowledged, surprising himself with the admission. After years of bitter doubt, something like faith had rekindled in him, not in God or government, but in the possibility of justice wrought by ordinary people standing together. As they prepared to part ways, Nalnish pressed something into his hand, the Medal of Honor he'd carried for so many years. "You dropped this," she said, "during the fight." Thad looked at the tarnished metal symbol of a nation's gratitude that had come to feel hollow in his years of disillusionment. Now, strangely, it seemed to carry new meaning, not as a token of past glory, but as a reminder of obligations that transcended uniform and flag. "Keep it," he told her, closing her fingers around the medal. "A symbol that some promises are worth keeping, even when those who made them fall short." Nalnish nodded understanding. She tucked the medal away, then joined her sister as they prepared to depart for the mountains and whatever future awaited their people. Thad watched them go, these extraordinary women who had transformed his life by stumbling into his barn barely a week earlier. Then he turned toward Tucson, where Morrison and Holloway would face justice, where evidence would become headlines, and where perhaps the foundations of a more honest territory might begin to take shape. The sun broke fully over the horizon, illuminating a landscape that remained harsh and unforgiving. But within its harshness, Thad now recognized possibilities he'd long forgotten the chance to build something worthy, on ground consecrated by struggle and sacrifice. Behind him, Holloway's ranch, smoldered symbol of one man's greed, reduced to ashes. Ahead lay Tucson, and the future uncertain but somehow more hopeful than it had been just days before. Thad adjusted his splintered wooden leg and began the journey one painful step at a time toward whatever waited beyond the next horizon. End of part. Epilogue. Tucson, 1882. The headline in the Arizona Star caught Thad's eye as he made his way down Congress Street. Former Senator Holloway begins prison term for corruption. 3 years had passed since that night at the ranch. 3 years of trials, testimonies, and the slow grinding of justice's wheels. Morrison had hanged 6 months earlier, convicted of multiple murders and theft of government property. Holloway, with better lawyers and influential friends, had managed to avoid the gallows, but not 20 years in federal prison. Thad smiled grimly at the headline. Justice delayed, but not ultimately denied. He continued to the small law office where he now worked as an investigator, his expertise in tracking corruption through paper trails having proved unexpectedly valuable. The wooden leg still slowed his gait, but he'd learned to compensate just as he'd learned to live with the other wounds, visible and invisible, that life had inflicted. On his desk waited a letter, bearing the distinctive handwriting he'd come to recognize immediately. Nalnish wrote infrequently, but her updates from the newly established Apache Autonomous Region always brought satisfaction. The treaty she'd helped negotiate using Holloway's evidence as leverage had secured a modest but viable homeland where her people could maintain their traditions while adapting to changing times. Outside Arizona territory continued its march toward statehood and civilization, a process now tempered, however slightly, by voices that might otherwise have been silenced. Morales's newspaper had grown in influence. The Mexican and Apache communities had gained hard-won seats at tables where decisions were made. Not paradise by any means, not even close, but perhaps a territory where justice stood a fighting chance against greed and power. Thad opened Nalnish's letter, curious what news she brought from the mountains. As he read her measured words describing both challenges and progress, he felt again the strange sense of purpose that had awakened in him that night at Holloway's ranch. The land remained harsh and unforgiving, but within its harshness there remained room for something that, if not quite redemption, at least resembled hope. For a man who had once believed in nothing but survival, it was enough. The end.